Thank you, Mr. Secretary. When you were being prepared, in a sense of preparing yourself to take your role in the cabinet, were you briefed in any way, or what part of the possibility of terrorism occurring was part of your preparation? I mean, as you looked at all the vast things you had to understand for your position, was the possibility of terrorism and what you might have to do in a result of terrorism a large part of that briefing, a small part of that briefing?
The nature of what was happening in the civil aviation industry in the United States at that time did not put terrorism high on the list of priorities. We were still dealing with the whole issue of delays, of congestion, of capacity issues, and so terrorism was really not something that I was prepared to deal with, except as it came up on that tragic day.
So you had to improvise, in a sense, based on what was happening and what the news reports you were getting.
Absolutely. And in terms of what motivated me to bring all the aircraft down, as you see one thing happen, that's an accident. When you see two of the same thing occur, it's a pattern. But when you see three of the same thing occur, it's a program. And so at that point, I decided to bring all the aircraft down.
In a sense, what I'm trying to get at, I guess, is that the government was really unprepared for this kind of an event. Nobody had anticipated it, this event or any kind of major terrorist event. So this was not a major preparation. You weren't prepared. You had to do your best under very difficult circumstances.
That's correct, sir.
There's been some confusion as to the issue of box cutters. You testified, I gather, that as of September 11th, the FAA did not prohibit box cutters before Congress. Yesterday, we got testimony from the ATA that in checkpoint operation guides, box cutters were classified as restricted items, which could be kept off an aircraft if identified. What was the status of box cutters within the aviation system as a whole, and certainly in Boston where those checkpoints were?
The FAA regulation referred to blades of 4 inches or greater as prohibited items. And so a box cutter was really less than 4 inches. Now, on the other hand, the airline industry had a guideline, and in that guideline, they did prohibit box cutters, as it was in that guideline. But in the FAA regulations, that was not the case. All they referred to was the length of the blade, and that was 4 inches. And so under the FAA regulations, box cutters would have been okay on an airplane.
Mr. Secretary, we're very pleased to have you here this morning. I understand your time is short and you'll only be able to spend a few minutes with us. We're grateful for the time you're able to make available. It might very well be that we'll have some questions we will want to submit to you in writing subsequently.
And I will submit those to the Commission in writing.
Well, we thank you for that. I wanted to focus just a moment on the Presidential Emergency Operating Center. You were there for a good part of the day. I think you were there with the Vice President. And we had that order given, I think it was by the President, that authorized the shooting down of commercial aircraft that were suspected to be controlled by terrorists. Were you there when that order was given?
No, I was not. I was made aware of it during the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, "Do the orders still stand?" And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?" Well, at the time, I didn't know what all that meant. And
The flight you're referring to is the
the
one-
flight that came into the Pentagon.
Pentagon, yeah.
And so I was not aware that that discussion had already taken place. And but in listening to the conversation between the young man and the vice president, then at the time I didn't really recognize the significance of that. And then later I heard of the fact that the airplanes had been scrambled from Langley to come up to D.C., but those planes were still about 10 minutes away. And so then at the time we heard about the airplane that went into Pennsylvania, then I thought, oh my God, did we shoot it down? And then we had to, with the vice president, go through the Pentagon to check that out.
Let me see if I understand. The plane that was headed toward the Pentagon and was some miles away, there was an order to shoot that plane down.
Well, I don't know that specifically, but I do know that the airplanes were scrambled from Langley or from Norfolk, the Norfolk area, and so. But I did not know about the order specifically, other than listening to that other conversation.
But there very clearly was an order to shoot commercial aircraft down.
Subsequently, I found that out.
With respect to Flight 93, what type of information were you and the Vice President receiving about that flight?
The only information we had at that point was when it went into when it crashed.
I see. You didn't know beforehand about that airplane.
Did not.
And so there was no specific order there to shoot that plane down.
No, sir.
But there were military planes in the air in position to shoot down commercial aircraft.
That's right. The planes had been scrambled, I believe, from Otis at that point.
Could you help me understand a little the division of responsibility between the FAA and NORAD on that morning?
Well, FAA is in touch with NORAD, and when the first flight from Boston had gone out of communications with the air traffic controllers, the air traffic controller then notified, I believe, Otis Air Force Base about the air traffic controller not being able to raise that American Airlines flight.
A final question, and then we'll let other commissioners ask a question, and this is a kind of a broad sweeping one. What worries you most about transportation safety today? What are the most vulnerable points, do you think, in our transportation system today? A lot of steps have been taken, obviously, to improve security. A lot of progress made. What would be towards the top of your list, or would there be 2 or 3 items that worry you the most?
I would say today the most vulnerable would be the maritime ports. With the number of containers coming into this country, we really don't have a good handle on what's in those containers. And to me, that is one that we still haven't really been able to put our hands on. I know that the Transportation, Security Agency is looking and working on that matter diligently. But we, with the number of containers that come off of ships every day, and it's something like 16 million a year, it's a formidable task.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I understand the Secretary's time is very tight now.
One final question, and then we'll go to Commissioner Roma. Is there one recommendation you know of that's pending now, either in the administration or the Congress or wherever, that you believe would be most important toward making the traveling public feel safer?
I suppose in terms of aviation, I think that we are probably as confident about the security relating to aviation issues today. In terms of where we were before the 11th of September and the improvements that were made subsequent to the 11th of September, and in terms of each month, each day, it gets better. But again, I would go back to my maritime containers as still the most vulnerable and the one that really needs the funding, and to get to the bottom of that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Commissioner Roma?
Nice to see you, Mr. Secretary, and nice to see you feeling better and getting around as well, too. I want to follow up on what happened in the Presidential Emergency Operations Center and try to understand that day a little bit better. You said, if I understood you correctly, that you were not in the room. You were obviously coming from the Department of Transportation, where you had been busy in a meeting, in official business, but you had not been in the room when the decision was made to what you inferred was a decision made to attempt to shoot down Flight 77 before it crashed into the Pentagon. Is that correct?
I didn't know about the shooting, the order to shoot down. I arrived at the PIOC at about 9:20 a.m. and the president was in Florida, and I believe he was on his way to Louisiana at that point when the conversation that went on between the vice president and the president and the staff that the president had with him.
So when you arrived at 9:20, how much longer was it before you overheard the conversation between the young man and the vice president saying, does the order still stand?
It's probably about 5 or 6 minutes.
So about 9:25 or 9:26. And your inference was that the vice president snapped his head around and said, yes, the order still stands. Why did you infer that that was a shoot down?
Just by the nature of all the events going on that day, scrambling of the aircraft, and I don't know, I guess just being in the military, you do start thinking about an intuitive reaction to certain statements being made.
Who was the young man with the vice president?
Frankly, I don't recall.
And was there another line of communication between the vice president and you said you saw Mr. Richard Clark on your way in? Was Clark running an operations center as well on that day?
Dick was in the Situation Room.
So there was a Situation Room making decisions about what was going to happen on
I don't believe
shoot
they
downs as
were
well as the
making-
PIOC?
I don't believe they were making any decisions. I think they were more information gathering from various agencies.
Could it have been in the Situation Room where somebody in the Situation Room recommended the shoot down and the Vice President agreed to that?
Commissioner Romer, I would assume that a decision of that nature would have had to be made at a much higher level than the people who were in the Situation Room.
So take me through that. The Situation Room is monitoring the daily, minute-by-minute events, and they find out that Flight 77 is headed to the Pentagon. Somebody's got to be getting that information. The Situation Room is then communicating with the PIOC and saying, we've got another flight that's on its way toward the Pentagon. Here are the options. Then the Vice President talks to the President and says, here are the options. We have a shoot-down recommendation. Do you agree, Mr. President? Is that what happens?
Again, that would be speculation on my part as to what was happening on that day. So I just wouldn't be able to really answer that
I
on that
know,
inquiry.
because you had been conducting official business, and I'm sure you were hurriedly on your way over there.
As I was listening,
I'm just trying to figure out how the Situation Room, which is gathering, the minute-by-minute evidence and information and talking probably to a host of different people, and how they're interacting with the PIOC, and then how the PIOC is interacting with the President, who's at that point on Air Force One, how a decision is made to shoot down a commercial airliner. And then would you say, let's say we're trying to put that part of the puzzle together, then would your inference be that they scrambled the jets to shoot down the commercial airliner, it failed, and the commercial airliner therefore crashed into the Pentagon? That the jets were not able to get there in time to succeed in a mission that they'd been tasked to do?
I'm not sure that the aircraft that were scrambled to come up to the D.C. area from Norfolk were under orders to shoot the airplane down. As I said,
But it was an inference on your part.
it was an inference, without a doubt. And that's why, when in thinking about the United plane that went down in Pennsylvania, the question that arose in my mind.
Right away was that shot down? And
Yes,
did
sir.
you ever get an answer to that?
But yes, sir, the Vice President and I talked about that. We then made the inquiry of the Department of Defense. They then got back to us saying, no, it was not our
The
aircraft.
shots were
That were
fired
shot.
and no effort was made to shoot that
That's
down?
correct.
Excuse me, I'm going to go to another
Yeah,
commissioner.
thank you.
Secretary's time is limited. Commissioner Lehman.
Mr. Secretary, I have one question, and that is, we had testimony yesterday that there were many intelligence reports leading up to 9/11 and actual plots uncovered to use aircraft as missiles. Do you feel that the system set up to provide to you as Secretary of Transportation the latest intelligence bearing on your responsibilities, such as that subject, was adequate before 9/11? If not, have measures been taken to see that you are provided with the best possible product on a daily basis as to threats to the broad range of transportation assets under your purview? Could you comment on before and after?
Well, I do get a daily briefing, intelligence briefing, and I did during that time period, prior to the 11th of September and subsequent to the 11th of September. And there's no doubt that the nature of the intelligence data has improved. And but again, there was nothing in those intelligence reports that would have been specific to anything that happened on the 11th of September. There was nothing in the preceding time period about aircraft being used as a weapon or of any other terrorist types of activities of that nature. And but I do get briefings, and I think that since the 11th of September 2001, the nature of the briefings have improved.
Just to follow up, Mr. Secretary, given the fact that there were in the preceding couple of years about a half a dozen novels and movies about hijackings being used as weapons, and the fact that there were reports floating around in the intelligence community, did you personally think that was a possibility, that it could have happened, or was, when it happened, did this take you totally by surprise? Because yesterday we had testimony from the former FAA administrator that, in effect, it never entered her mind.
Well, I would have to again say that I had no thought of the airplane being used as a weapon. I think our concentration was more on hijackings, and most of the hijackings as they occur in an overseas setting, or the hijacking, if it were to be a domestic one, was for the person to take over the aircraft, to have that aircraft transport them to some other place. But it wasn't, but I don't think we ever thought of an airplane being used as a missile.
Given that there was so much intelligence, not of specific plots, but of the possibility and the fact that some terrorists had in fact started planning, wouldn't you view it as a failure of our intelligence community not to tell the Secretary of Transportation that there was such a conceivable threat that the people like the Coast Guard and FAA should be thinking about?
We had no information of that nature at all. And as to whether that was a failure of the intelligence agencies, I think it would have been, just even for them, hard to imagine.
Thank you.
We recognize your time constraints. We have two more commissioners. If
Absolutely.
questions, Commissioner Gorelick and then Commissioner Fielding.
Secretary Mineta, again, thank you for being here. We all know that in the spring and summer of 2001, the intelligence community was putting out reports of I would say, near frantic level, suggesting that we were expecting there to be some type of terrorist attack somewhere in the world. It is clear we didn't know where, we didn't know the modality, but a very high level of concern. So my first question to you, and I'll just give them to you all at once, is one, were you called to any meeting or summoned at a cabinet level, or was there any sort of cross-functional group put together across the government to say, what can we do as a government to respond to this very heightened level of intelligence warning that we are getting generally? Second, even though in response to Commissioner Lehman's questions, you've indicated that this particular modality of attack was not made known to you. Clearly, hijackings and use of aircraft, or bombs on aircraft, were a favorite tool, if you will, of terrorists. Did you yourself do anything within the agencies under your control to seek out mechanisms for being on alert and for heightening our security in this period of reporting? What did you know? What was anyone telling you, and what did you do in response?
Well, first of all, on the first question, I would say no, that we had no meetings of an interagency nature, given the nature of intelligence that you're describing. I think most of the response at that time was to the what you might call the chatter, because the chatter is just really increased communication between people, but nothing specific as to the nature of the kind of attack that might be coming. We're at orange level now, and what prompted that was, again, increased chatter, but it wasn't anything specific about the nature of what the threat might be.
Well, let me just contrast perhaps the chatter, the same kind of chatter level in right in advance of the millennium. As I understand it, that information was widely disseminated in the government. There were cabinet level and sub-cabinet level meetings, and each agency essentially surged to do what they could to harden our country against attacks. Now, clearly, when you don't know where the attack is coming from or what mode will be used, it's difficult. But what I'm asking essentially is, did this higher level of chatter, the what I believe to be a frantic quality to the intelligence warnings, result in any action across the government, and particularly in the area of transportation? I take it your answer to that is no.
That's correct.
Commissioner Fielding?
Mr. Chairman, I would like a further explanation of the division of responsibility between the FAA and NORAD on the morning of 9/11, because there seems to be some confusion about that. I'd like the Secretary's views, but I'd be very happy in respect to his time to submit that in writing to him.
All right, I'll submit that for writing, in writing.
Secretary,